three European projects on tox, risk hunter, and precision tox, and we are focusing on developing and using non-animal new approach methodologies. We are developing some very exciting programs, and one of them, and this webinar is part of it, is our training program. So we do training sessions online and in person in different in-person conferences and meetings. But we have people from ASPIS, but also this webinar series. And until now, this webinar series was closed to only ASPIS members, but now we are opening to everyone interested in the topics. You can find more information about ASPIS Academy in our new website. You have the link here on the screen. And without further delay, I'll hand over to our speaker, Professor Mathieu Vinken, that will talk about funding, finding European research funding and writing a competitive research proposal. Just a small reminder, this webinar is being recorded. So if, for the ones that don't want to appear in the recording, please turn off your cameras. If you don't mind, you can let it on, but that's it. I'll handle the presentation to Mathieu, and well, wish you all a very nice webinar.
Yeah, thank you very much, Luis. Thank you very much, Eliška. Another very nice initiative, I would say, of the ASPIS Academy, which, as you all probably know by now, support because I really like this initiative. I think it's really important for young investigators to get some direction, so some information to build a career. So let me try to share my screen. I hope you see my screen now. Yes. You can try to put it in. I get a lot of pop-ups here, so I hope you don't see all of this, but you can only see my screen. All right.
Yeah.
So in this next 40-50 minutes or so, I would like to give you some inside information, especially from my personal experience on how to write a European project proposal. Successful, but as you will be hearing soon, not all of them were successful. Actually, writing European project proposals is a real business. The success rate is very low, as you probably know. So that is why I would like to share some of the experience with you to, to help you, to put you on the right track, if you will. For those of you that have attended the ESTIF conference, I regret to inform you that this is exactly the same presentation. So there was a pre-conference workshop on this. Sorry for the duplication, but on the other hand, I don't think it may harm to hear this more than once. It will be recorded, so you're more than welcome to watch this whenever you want. And of course, as I will be repeating all over during the presentation, you're more than welcome. Contact me with any further questions you might have in that respect. Just a couple of, information I would say regarding myself, and this is not a show-off slide, but it's just to show you to understand in what position I was and still am to apply for European project proposals. So education-wise, I'm a pharmacist, but I did a PhD more in the, let's say, the area of in vitro toxicology. So I always stayed at the same university in Brussels, in Belgium. And I'm very happy there, but if I can give you one piece of advice, well, already at this stage, it is good to switch a bit labs and to, build up some experience in also international mobility. So that always stands very well in a CV of a young investigator, just to show that you have done, let's say, the effort of going to different labs. That's a really nice asset in a CV. So I'm a toxicologist. I took some courses there, but maybe of relevance for today, I'm a European registered toxicologist, which is a kind of accreditation that is assigned by Eurotox, as you might know, which is the overarching toxicology association. I'm coordinating quite a few projects in the past and still ongoing, national ones, but also European ones. And I would say the most important ones are listed here on this slide. So I was very fortunate to get two grants from the European Research Council, the ERC, a starting grant, which basically was a major, let's say, kick at the start of my career. and then a follow-up one, which was a proof of concept grant. I will not talk about this today. Why is that? Because these are personal grants. And I think the experience I would like to share with you, it's more about multi-partner project proposals, which is a challenge on its own. So two examples in that respect are two ongoing projects I'm currently coordinating. The one is called Panache, which is in a nutshell all about finding new targets for the treatment of liver disease, and with that to come up with new drug candidates, which has been granted in the Future and Emerging Technologies program that does not exist anymore. As you might know, this has been replaced by the programs of the European Innovation Council, so not the ERC. And then the second one, which I would say consumes most of my time these days, is ONTOX. Most of you are familiar with the ONTOX project. It has already been touched upon by Luis in the introduction, which now has 19 partners. We started off in 21 for a 5 year period. So it's a pretty big project. It forms actually part of a project cluster, ASPIS, so hence the ASPIS Academy, if you will. So that was enough from my side, I would say. Now I would like to really focus on the most important topic for today is at least my experience in writing project proposals. So what you see here on this slide, it's not something that is common. It's not set in stone. It's just my own, let's say, experience when writing project proposals. There are a couple of different stages, if you will. So you can see that everything that is before the submission deadline, at least in my experience, consists of three main steps: the prospective work, the preparative work, and the writing proposal as such. It typically takes 9 months, and I always like to compare this with a pregnancy, if you will. Some coordinators of project proposals would say like, well, you're crazy, you don't need 9 months. Others would say like, well, you need much more time. It really depends on the project proposal and on the topic. But the message for you is don't wait until 1 or 2 months before the submission deadline, because usually it doesn't fly. As I will be touching upon later on, success rate European proposals is low, typically less than 15 or 10%. So if you want to make sure you have a competitive, proposal that has a chance of being granted, you need to start in time. There's no other way. Once you submit, then typically the European Commission gives itself at max 5 months to evaluate project proposal. It does not necessarily have to be 5 months. It really depends on how much proposals that have been submitted to a certain call. To give you an idea, for Marie Curie, the program, for example, they typically receive over 1,000 proposals. There, it can take up to 5 months. But for the more specific calls, then it would be, it can take 2 to 3 months. For ONTOX, for example, we already knew after 3 months that we got granted because there were not that much proposals being submitted to that call. And then if the outcome was positive, and if you're very lucky, then the grant agreement starts. And I will not touch upon that because that's really 1 or 2 or 3 presentations on its own. That's where the administration starts, because then of course it's like, wow, we got a project proposal, but then of course the commission likes to scrutinize your proposal, and well, they like administration, and that's a bit of the downside of European proposals. So that's well, which is a step on its own. So for today, I would like to focus on what comes before submission. I would like to guide you through these 3 steps. And again, I cannot emphasize this is not official kind of steps or something. It's something I came up with from my own, experience. So let's talk about the prospective work. So I hope you can see this next slide now, which has 2 main pillars, I would say. So the prospective work is something that should not be kicked off or should not be pulled off when you decided to write a project proposal. No, it's something that you do on a daily basis. It's something that you do as part of building your career. So you need to find the right network. You need to build your CV. You need to build your professional network. That's basically it. And how can you do this in different ways? You can attend congresses, symposia, workshop. I think that Eliska and Louise are very good examples of these. There's not a single toxicology conference where they're not represented or attending. And that's really nice because that's the way to show that you're visible and that you're active at the international front, and that's exactly what people pick up. So that's a very good way of finding your network. There are several other ways. For example, think about these cost actions. Some of you might be familiar with this. This is really about network building. cost actions are also quite competitive in the sense that not all of them are being granted. But once you get granted, the nice part about this is that this is open. So you can have a look at the cost website. You can see if there is any topic that is of interest to you. You can contact the coordinator and you can step into the project. Even if it is already running since a couple of years or so, they have the funding for this. So take advantage of this. Also very interesting is to have a look if there are already projects that have been granted in the area that you're also interested in, or in the area where you would like to submit a project proposal. And the go-to website for sure is Cordis, which is a very nice website that has been introduced and that is being maintained by the European Commission. It stands for Community Research and Development Information Service. So you can find projects via many ways. I mean, you can simply look based on keywords, these kind of things, and you also will find the information there of the coordinators. And that is not restricted to Horizon Europe and Horizon 2020, but also to the predecessors. So to the projects that become, or the framework projects, I should rather say, that came before that. So a second thing you need to do, of course, is to find the right call. And this brings us to the Horizon Europe project or program. I always keep on saying project, but it's in fact a program. I think, and I hope you're familiar with this, we're talking about a 96 billion program. So it typically takes 7 years, and the Commission comes up with a new program every 7 years. So the one that is currently running will end somewhere in 27. And it is built up by these 3 pillars, as you can see here. So pillar 1 is all about excellence science, and these are in most cases, well, not in most cases, but in several cases, personal grants, like the ERC, for instance, which I already alluded to. Marie Curie, you know this, there are the postdoctoral fellowships, but there's also, for example, the doctoral networks, which used to be called the ITNs. Then there is pillar 3, which was a bit new, or at least it has been revamped in Horizon Europe compared to Horizon 2020, which was the program before Horizon Europe. So it now contains the European Innovation Council, which used to be the Future and Emerging Technologies program. And then there is the middle one, which is all about the societal challenges, these kind of things. And this is the one that I would like to focus on in the remainder of the presentation. So these are typically the very specific calls, if you will, whereas in pillar 1 and 3, the calls are not predefined. There you can basically submit any kind of topic. In pillar 2, this is different. So here you will have very specific topics. So for example, where we have submitted for OnTalks, well, the call was very explicit. Safety assessment without the use of animals. So you cannot be more specific than that. So that's a difference here, and that's usually the multi-partner calls, if you will. And then for the sake of completeness, you can see that there is the bar there, widening participation and strengthening the European research area, which is part of all of these pillars as such, but I will not go into the details here. But get yourself acquainted with this because it's quite complex. I mean, we are privileged in Europe that we have so many funding opportunities, but it is complex. But nevertheless, it is worthwhile taking the time for you to go through this and make yourself acquainted with all of the funding possibilities. So here again, where you certainly need to have a look at is the participant portal, which next to Cordis, actually it's more or less the same website as Cordis, but this is where you can find all of the call information, the guidance, the templates. Again, there's a lot of information there. Myself, for those of you who know me, I'm pretty impatient, but in this case, you really need to take the time to really go through all of this information and, basically take all of this up because there's a lot of things you need to be aware of. And well, again, the Commission likes administration, but there's no other way than going through it. Get yourself also familiar with the participant portal websites. It's not always the most users-friendly website, unfortunately. It's very often down technically, which I think is a pity. But yeah, it's something you have to anticipate. And already one piece of recommendation, and I will be coming back to this further on, is you have to anticipate technical issues, unfortunately, with the participant portal. This is also where you will have to submit your project proposal. And you have to expect technical issues in the sense that it might be that at the time of the deadline of the project proposal you want to submit, well, that the website is down. The Commission does not take responsibility for that. So that's a reason why you should not wait until the very last moment to submit your proposal. So typically we try to submit at latest a week before the actual submission deadline. Okay, so that was the prospective work. So remember, there are 3 steps. The next one is all about the preparative work. So you have identified the call, if you will. You have identified your network. You have your network. The next step is, well, you want to, let's say, start to write a project proposal as coordinator. So let's be ambitious. So you will write this as not as a partner, but as a coordinator. The first thing I typically do here is to draft a basic concept about the project proposal. And I'm pretty visual, so I like to have this done in a kind of, a figure, if you will. It can be very simple, a simple workflow, if you will. Alternatively, or maybe in parallel, you can also describe this in a one-pager or a typical or a kind of an abstract. So just your very rough ideas, a helicopter view of what your project proposal would look like. Please do this because it will come in very handy. This will evolve over time and you will be very happy that you already did this from step 1, if you will. The next step is then to compose your, let's say, I call it the core consortium. So this is really the critical mass, if you will. So you have identified the expertise that you need. Now you need to link some people with that. And that's really important. Typically, you would look here in your network. And again, that is showing again why it is so important to have a solid and a very active and updated network, if you will. So you have to look in your own network. If you don't find the expertise in your network, then you have to look somewhere else. What I typically do is I try to go via the network of collaborators, just to make sure that you're on the first row, if you will, to have like new contacts. But you can do this also yourself by looking into literature, if you will, and identifying people behind the papers that are of relevance to you and thus also to the project proposal. One piece of recommendation from my side is that you do not necessarily have to look for the hotshots. That does mean that, of course, for example, you will find very nice papers in Nature or whatever, but that does not always mean that those people are the people that you want to have in your consortium. And I don't mean it in a bad way, but those people are typically very busy, and they not always have the time for spent on a project proposal, these kind of things. So my advice would be here is that you will have to look for more the proactive partners rather than those that necessarily have the best CV. It's just to save you a lot of like stress and a lot of issues further on in the project proposal writing exercise. It is always a pity, and unfortunately it still happens also with me, is that you will have to drop one partner in the course of the proposal writing process because they're simply not active enough and they do not provide the input that you need. So that is something that you already can make sure you have to shortcut already at the start of the process. So in this, in this step, if you will. What you certainly need to do is to organize, I wouldn't say at least one, but at least 2, 3, 4, or 5 brainstorming meetings. We like to do things online these days, of course, since COVID, which makes sense because it's easy. But my experience is that especially in the first few meetings, it's always better to have like an in-person meeting because it's not the same as communicating and interacting online. So try to invest in this, in such a meeting. That's really important. And there you can start from, the concept and the workflow that you came up with yourself. And in the meanwhile, probably has evolved already. It has become a little bit more mature. That will help you a lot in making your idea clear to the partners, if you will. You can use this as a starting point, and then people will start to feed in their visions and their idea, and this is where the process starts. So you can do this together with your core consortium, and as the draft proposal evolves, you will also start to identify missing expertise, and with that, of course, missing partners. And this is then brings you to the next step, is to compose the full consortium. So you will need to look to who is still missing here. Very, very important here is that you avoid duplication. That is a very frequent reason also for rejection of project proposal, is that, for example, in my case, my expertise really is about in vitro toxicology with focus on liver. Well, you don't need 2 or 3 of those in a single consortium. So try to avoid this. Ideally, the expertise and thus the partner should be complementary, and in the most ideal situation, it should be synergistic, which, as you probably know, means that 1 plus 1 is not 2, but actually is 3. So that is what you need to look for, because this is exactly also how the evaluators of your proposal will look at the, the proposal. So concept-wise, of course, but also did you select the right people? You also need to do this in a strategic way. Don't forget, we're talking about a European project proposal, which is being paid by tax money in the end. And that's why the European Commission, likes to see coverage of the entire population, let's say, of the European Union. So make sure that you have, if that is possible, that you have representation of the different countries, north, east, south, west. Of course, first and foremost, the criterion for selecting a partner is expertise, but think about that as well. Think about also sector variation, not only the typical academics, but you need people depending on the topic, of course, from industry, from governmental institutions, regulatory agencies, and things, of course, like inclusiveness, gender balance. I mean, that's even a no-brainer. Make sure that you have this covered as well. And then you can actually start do the work. That would be the project proposal. Don't underestimate how much work you already have done in the steps before that, because you already have conceived the idea. But here you need to write it down. Typically, you will have to follow the template that has been defined and that has been established by the European Commission. There are different templates depending on the call, on the project proposal, but they usually follow the same kind of buildup, if you will, which is in a maybe oversimplistic way shown here on this slide. So part A is typically what you will have to fill out online. That's the administrative part, some general information about the participant context, the budgets. Don't postpone the budget until the very last moment, because it will be a topic of discussion, especially if you have a multi-partner consortium. Of course, everybody wants a maximum budget for doing the least of money, or least of effort. But of course, these are the kind of discussions you don't want to have at the very end near the deadline of the submission. You will have to set these kind of discussions already at the very start. Things like ethics, and then call specific questions. In general, administration, well, I don't think any of us likes to do administration, but that's another reason why we should not, postpone it until the very end. So do this already at the start, and you might get some help also from the different partners, but especially if it is about universities, they might have some services departments that can assist you in that. Then part B, which consists of 3 main sections, if you will: excellence, impact, and implementations. And I will be coming back to this in detail in the next few slides. That's the real template, the real project proposal, which can vary between something 15 pages. For other calls, the page limitation is set as 70 pages. And then some annexes, which are really call depending. If you, for example, include clinical trials, then obviously you need to provide necessary information on this. If you have so-called third parties that are involved, so for example, US-based companies or universities, well, then you need to provide some information there. For the purpose of this presentation, I would like to focus on the second bullet point, which is really the project proposal itself. So I would like to guide you through each of these 3 sections: excellence, impact, and implementation. So excellence, well, there you will be asked to give a description on the objectives and the ambition. You will need to give a very good overview of the state of the art in the area in which you are submitting your proposal. Very important there is that you make sure that it's not incremental, so it's not the logical follow-up of something that is already out there. Also, you need to distinguish between novelty and innovation, of course, so that's really important. So an example here, which I think I also gave during the ASPIS conference, is novelty would be, for example, well, you would like to establish a new in vitro model, let's say a liver-based in vitro model, and you will include a cell type that has not been used before. That's something novel. What is innovative? That would be, for example, the use of artificial intelligence in the field of animal-free safety evaluation of of chemicals. So now, of course, it's not innovative anymore, but when it was introduced a couple of years ago, well, then it was, wow, something very new. So that's very important that you distinguish between that. It's very important also that you define an overarching goal of the project proposal, but that this is supported by individual objectives. And the objectives, each of them should meet the SMART criteria, which means that they should be specific, they should be quantifiable, so you should be able to measure them. They should be realistic, achievable, they should obviously be relevant, and they should be timely. So have to make sure that each of the objectives meets each of these criteria. Depending on the call, especially if you want to develop a new kind of technology, it might be that you will be asked to define the TRL, the technology readiness level. I'm not really sure if you know what this is, but this is something that comes from the NASA. So when they were developing space technology, they have a kind of a grade system that varies from 0 to 9, which gives you a reflection of the maturation of the technology. And this has also been applied now to technology in general. So you might need to define that as well. Very important, of course, is that you describe in quite some detail that you actually comply with what was asked in the project call. Then you will have to write something about the methodology, but to avoid misunderstandings, this is not the same as the implementation, which will come back later on. Here you will have to provide a kind of a helicopter view of what the approach, the modus operandi will be in general, without going into the really details, if you will, of each of the tasks and work packages. Typically, you can do this again in a visual way, the concept and the workflow that you already designed at the very start of the process. Always a figure tells much more than 10 pages of text. Also for reviewers, that's much nicer to evaluate. So try to spend also some time on that. Very important is that you always do this in view of introducing a 3I dimension. So this means that your proposal should be international. Of course, this will be the case if you have multiple partners. These days, your proposal should be multi-interdisciplinary. So not only the typical life sciences, but also you can involve ethics, law, these kind of things, depending on the topic. And it should be intersectoral. So again, implying that not only you should have academics as partners, but also industry, governmental institutions, and so on. Well, I already emphasized the importance of being inclusive at many ways. So that would be geographic variation, gender balance, these kind of things. You need to pay attention also, especially in fields of life sciences, the gender dimension, and that is not the same as gender balance. So gender balance really is about, do you have, like 50% women and also 50% men in your consortium, so to say? Is there a good, distribution there? Gender dimension is something different, and that is really at the research level. So for example, you want to set up, I will always give the example, of course, of a liver-based in vitro model. You want to set up a new liver-based in vitro model, and you have a good reason to only focus on cells from female or from male donors because they are more susceptible to that kind of toxicity that you want to investigate. That is a gender dimension. That's not a gender balance. So this needs to be justified by some scientific argumentation, if you will. And then, of course, as you probably know, open science has become more and more important. The idea would be is that you share as much as you can your data, even your raw data, which also should be reflected in a DMP, the data management plan, which you typically have to submit within 6 months after the start of the project. And a very important part of the DMP would be the FAIR data. So your data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. All right, so that was the excellence section. So the second section is also very important. It's about impact, because of course, in the end, what we want to generate here is impact. We want to avoid that after the end of your project that it kind of evaporates and that nothing happens. No, you need to create a legacy and you need to have impact as much as you can. So in the project goal, you already will have some predefined levels of impact, and that is what the European Commission envisage as being important. Of course, you will have to describe in your project proposal to what extent and how you will meet those impact levels. So how will you generate this? You have to do this in a quantitative way. So for example, if you say like, okay, I will have a new in vitro model and it will bring me a reduction of animal use. Be specific in this. What will be the reduction? How much percent? How will you monitor this? These kind of things. So just don't write very loose and vague words. It needs to be very specific. You also need to define a number of barriers and requirements with that. So what will make your life difficult in trying to realize that impact? Also, a piece of advice here is that you should not restrict yourself to the impact levels that have been described by the Commission. Go beyond that. So for sure, there will be impact that has not been included in the project goal, but that you already have in mind. Do this because this is really a plus during the evaluation of your project proposal. So you go beyond what actually is expected. There are some ways of maximizing the impact, and I will be coming back to this further on at the level of communication, dissemination, which is not the same, and then also exploitation. So we already talked about excellence. We talked about impact. The third section in part B, so the project proposal is implementation. So this is the how. You already described what. So how will you do this? This is the section where you will have to write all of the details on work packages, tasks, and so on. So it's not superficial. It's really going into the nitty-gritty, all of the very specific details. Two very important tools that you will have to use here is a PER chart and a Gantt chart. These are not the same. Actually, what you can see here on this slide is a, let's say, very generic overview of how a PER and a Gantt chart can look like. A PER chart is more about how the different tasks and the work packages are interlinked with each other, whereas the Gantt chart will give you a spreading of all these tasks over time. So don't mix them up, but it is important that you actually include this. Also very important is that you will have to come up with a plan of how you will pull off the research. Typically, you will have to use some predefined tables in the template, so work packages, tasks, deliverables, milestones, and I will be coming back on this further on. What exactly does that mean? Very important, of course, you will have to make an assessment of the risky steps in your proposal. And with that, of course, you will have to come up with a number of backup plans. Also very important, especially in the multi-partner proposals, is how will you manage all of this? What is your management structure? Do you have an advisory board? Do you have an executive committee? These kind of things. Very important as well is that, well, you already have cherry-picked your different partners, but now you will really have to showcase here that they really function as a synergistic group, that all of the expertise is, what I already mentioned, not only complementary, but ideally seen synergistic. So you will have to show how all of these pieces of the puzzle fit together and how you will pull this off. And again, all in the context of this 3I dimension. And with this, of course, for each of the partners, you will have to also explain that they are in the position to do the work that they are promised to do in this proposal. So this can be done, for instance, by making a listing of the infrastructure that is necessary and that they have available. Just a couple of definitions for you, which is typical, EU project proposal terminology, and that I already used a couple of times. So what is the difference between a deliverable and a milestone? A deliverable typically is a report, which you have to submit usually near the end stages of a project. Also, it can be at intermediate points, but usually most of them at the end. And it gives you a written overview, it gives the commission a written overview of what has been done towards achieving that task. And that's a bit different compared to a milestone. A milestone is really an intermediate checkpoint. It does not have to be a report. Usually it's not a report. For example, one could be, well, you have a communication plan. Well, the first milestone could be, we have the website up and running, for instance. So that could be a milestone. Then a risk and a contingency. Well, I think a risk, it speaks for itself what it is. Typically here also, you will have to make an assessment of the risk. So is it a high risk, a low risk? Is it an intermediate risk? And with that, can you come up with a number of backup plans that you will have to deploy in order to secure the feasibility of your project? Terminology that is also very frequently mixed up, but that is not the same as communication and dissemination. Communication is really about, you communicate about the project itself and also about its results. And you typically have to do this in layman language. Well, you first need to define your different target audiences, which can go from the scientist all up to the patient, if you will, to somebody in industry. And to reach each of them, you will have to use different communication tools and you will have to use different language. And that is a bit different compared to dissemination. In dissemination, we are only talking about communicating the results, the outcome of your project without talking about the project itself. So this is usually already more niche specific. So here you can use the more, let's say, scientific kind of language, if you will. But here again, you will have to discriminate between the different target audiences. It can be that you will have to talk to a medical doctor or to a scientist in a lab. But the message here is that it's usually only about the outcome. And then exploitation, I will not dwell on this too much because this is also really project depending. It can be that something will come out of your project that might be eligible for a patent, for example. A distinction is made between what we call economic valorization, and that could be a patent, but also regulatory valorization, which is really relevant in the context of ASPIS, for instance. An example of regulatory valorization could be that you make a contribution to a white paper or a guideline that is being drafted by one of the regulatory agencies. So that's another form of exploitation. All right. Then just, a couple of, well, some recommendation, I would say, from my own experience is, especially when you write a project proposal, is that you have to collect all of the critical information. I think this makes a lot of sense. That is pretty straightforward. Again, take your time to go through all of the guidelines, use all of the templates, go through all of them. Familiarize yourself with the evaluation criteria. Very often, you will see that the Commission also makes available the evaluation grids that the evaluators will use to evaluate your proposal. Go to this, use this, make it easy for the reviewers to find the information that they need. So that's why it is important that you pick up that information as well. And in general, you need to be aware of topics that independent of the topic of the project call for which you are preparing a project proposal. You need to be aware of topics, items that in general are very high on the European agenda. Think about the Green Deal. Think about inclusiveness. Think about artificial intelligence, these kind of things. So make sure that these are a bit intertwined, if you will, throughout and scattered around your project proposal, which is a huge plus, of course. The writing task, usually a difficult point of discussion, is that ideally seen, of course, you will distribute the task. The general parts are being taken care of by the coordinator, and that the specific parts by the different partners. The reality is, and I speak again from my own experience, is that you usually end up as project coordinator to write a proposal mostly yourself. But I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing, because this will also ensure the consistency throughout the proposal. Because you can imagine with a proposal like ONTOX, for instance, where we had almost 20 partners, everybody has a different writing style and so on. And if you just put all of this together and just submit it, well, yeah, then it's clear that it's not a consistent proposal. You need somebody to actually take care of this and do uniformizes all of this. And this is the task of the coordinator. It's very time consuming, I can tell you, but it's worthwhile the effort. You might have some assistance also, depending on where you're working, especially with part A, with the administrative part. But here again, as a coordinator, I would strongly suggest that you at least revise that information. You probably know that there are these offices that you can include as a full-blown partner in your proposal that take care already at the project proposal phase of the writing of the proposal. My advice is to not include them. I don't say that they are doing a bad job. Actually, it's the contrary that applies, but they're usually pretty expensive. And at least from my experience, this is money that I would like to spend more on involving a research partner, right? Rather than somebody that streamlines all of the things that you're about to do yourself anyway. And that's also something that the Commission actually likes to see, that money is being spent on research rather than on this. Of course, for the bigger projects like ONTOX, you will need to have a project manager. I'm in a very nice situation where we have one. You can foresee a budget for this in your own coordinating budget, but don't involve a separate bureau for this or an office. At least that's my opinion. Set internal deadlines, also a very difficult one. Think about this 9 months period that you actually need. Again, it's usually very competitive, so try to make sure that you have enough of revision rounds, and that's really important. Some personal tips and tricks. I do not know how I do now time-wise, so I will not go through all of them in detail, but this is just a listing of things that I might already have told before. But again, that, at least in my opinion, are very important. I will just pick out a couple of them. Is yeah, of course, that you need to introduce variation in the language, and that is why it is important that somebody, you know, at least does the effort of going through the entire proposal and uniforms all of this. Take your time for what I call the cosmetics. So it's not only about the contents, but also make sure that you can submit a proposal that is nice to look at. This may seem and sound very trivial, but when it comes down to, you know, a number of very good project proposals, this can maybe one of the things that make your proposal standing out. So that's really important. And as already mentioned, don't wait until the very deadline to submit your proposal. Just for your information, because in addition to writing quite a few project proposals, some of which have been successful, some of them were not, I also have been in some of these evaluation committees, also at the EU level. So I can use that experience to give you some insights of the most common reasons for rejection of project proposals. Which can relate to different topics. So, for example, relating to the project proposal itself, well, very obvious things, but sometimes that we see still, going on is like suboptimal description of methodology, being too vague, not specific enough, just being incremental, a lack of novelty, these kind of things. Again, the consortium, which is also very important. So make sure that you spend a lot of time on selecting the right partners. Again, avoid the duplication. Make sure you have this 3I dimension, these kind of things. Administrative issues, that is this part A. So again, in general, I recommend you to not postpone this until the very last moment. Think about budgeting issues. Make sure that you follow each and every step of the template. Don't deviate from that. It can be a reason to make or to consider or declare your proposal ineligible. So you don't want to do this actually. Discrepancies between different parts, very important. And then some various reasons, so ethics issues, poor writing, of course. Like most of you, I'm not an English native speaker, but that does not mean that you will have to submit a very poorly written proposal. So have your proposal revised by an English native speaker, or at least somebody who speaks English very well. Pay attention to the non-research parts, communication, dissemination, these kind of. People sometimes ask me, what is the success formula for getting a proposal granted? There is none, but this is, from my experience, what at least can help. There are 3 factors. The good thing is that you have control of 3 of those factors. So the first one is about yourself. So make sure that you have a competitive CV, which you can do in different ways. But my recommendation, again, is make yourself visible internationally. And then regarding the project proposal, make sure that you don't have a kind of Me Too proposal. So just duplicating of what is already out there. Try to have an original, a novel idea that has major impact, very generic, not only applying to your proposal, but going beyond that. The reality, of course, is that you need also a very good portion of luck. And that's just how it is. You're always at the mercy of the reviewers. And that's unfortunately a factor that is out of your control, but at least the 3 formal factors you can have this under your control. To end up some general, I would say, recommendations from my side on how you can increase your chances for being successful at the level of the principal investigators. Well, I think it makes sense. And it's pretty clear that you need to possess some basic skills like intellectual capacity, creativity, commitment. Very important, and I know this is not always very obvious or very easy, is that you will have to show some, level of independence, especially for young investigators at the postdoc level. You can do this in many ways, like discuss with your supervisor to be last author of proposals, that you're, in a position of taking the leads in some initiatives. That's important as well. Well, some other skills, of course, about organization, these kind of things, communications. And again, I cannot emphasize this enough. The 3 I's are so important. The project proposal itself, nothing new, but again, try to be original there. Don't just go with the flow. Don't be mainstream. Think out of the box. High risk, high gain. These are all EU kind of terminology things. But try to implement this. Don't use this as very loose and vague words, but try to put an action with that. And this is exactly the exercise mentally that takes quite some time. And that is the reason why you should not start to write a project proposal 2 months before the submission deadline, because this, the thinking process, that is what takes most of your energy and most of your time. And again, the impact. Be aware of what is high on the European agenda and make sure that you have an impact on each and every of those things. And just, an experience from myself and a recommendation from myself is that you need to be resilient and persistent. As I already mentioned a couple of times, the success rate is unfortunately very low. Nationally, that is typically, at least for Belgium, for example, if you submit a proposal at the Research Foundation Flanders, the success rate is something between up to 25%. European level, it's even lower, 10 to 15%, but for some programs, it can even be below 5%, and that's not really encouraging, but that's just how it is. And just to give you an example of how resilient and persistent you actually should be. So I mentioned at the start of the presentation, I was granted an ERC starting grant 10 years ago. And I was very ambitious then to submit also a proposal for the Consolidator program, which I did in 2017. And I only had one chance at that time because I already was too old, according to the guidelines. I submitted the proposal, which was all about AOPs and cholestatic liver injury and how this can be used, for animal-free toxicity testing. And it was already rejected in the first round. And of course, I really was disappointed. But over time, I started to take up, the many feedback I received from the reviewers. And I started to turn it into something positive, like, well, they could be right. I mean, we could have done this in a bit of a better way. And then a couple of years later, this project call was published in Pillar 2, which was about societal challenges, so safety assessment without animals. And this is how the OnTox project actually was conceived. So I was, getting back to the original ERC Consolidator grant proposal, and I was thinking like, well, hey, maybe that's not a bad idea at all, but we can maybe elaborate this to other types of toxicity. We can include AI and so on. So I went through this entire process that I actually laid out during this presentation, and in the end, we were successful. So this is just an example for you to show that you should not give up. Please be resilient and persistent, and always recycle your project proposals, because even if they are not granted, you will always get some very nice, well, not always nice, but you will get some feedback from the reviewers, and in the end, it is useful. I don't say that you will be able to submit again your entire same proposal, but at least some bits and parts of that. So yeah, that's my piece of advice there. So that was it. So you can see here my very nice team at the University of Brussels. I'm always very happy to help people, especially the young investigators, to get their, let's say, career launch. So don't hesitate to ask me any questions either now or later on. I'm always very happy to interact. So with this, thank you very much for your attention. And again, would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mathieu. And if is there any question from the audience, we still have some minutes. Please, or put the question in the chat or open the microphone and ask it directly.
I have one.
Yeah, Ahmed, go ahead.
Yeah, it's Ahmed. Thank you very, very much for the interesting presentation. So, European fundings programs often encourage or require sometimes international collaborations, which can be complex to coordinate. What are the primary challenges? Sorry, the primary challenges you have faced in coordinating cross-border research collaboration within Europe, and how do you overcome, logistical and cultural differences in ensuring successful project outcomes, I would say.
Yeah, it's a very good point, Ahmed, because indeed well, it's a challenge, but I think it's a blessing at the same time. That's the beauty of Europe. So indeed, although we are unified, there are huge differences, I would say. Well, huge. There are differences, cultural differences, and also in the way of dealing with project proposals. Actually, this would have been a very good question to answer by my project manager, Julia, because she's mainly dealing with the different partners. I do as well, but there are a few. And I will not start to, really talk about the specific, experiences we had, because I don't want to target anyone, but there are a couple of them. The reason my advice would be here to be patient and to look for a consensus. There's no right or there is no wrong. You have to accept that people, for example, will deal in different ways with deadlines. You have to accept that people deal in different ways with priorities. It's something you have to anticipate, and that is another reason while your project is ongoing. To give you an example now, we are in the stage of getting another review in the Ontox project, which is a lot of administration. You need to deal with the European Commission. The way our project manager, Julia, deals with this is to start early on. So she makes it very easy, very user-friendly for all of the partners which are scattered around Europe to get the information in time. And you should anticipate that there will be people that say, well, we will not meet the deadline and so on. So you should have backup plans for that. In my experience, it's a learning curve, and I actually like it a lot. I must admit that sometimes it can be frustrating. It's not always very easy, but you learn how to deal with it. But it's something that is just an inherent part of European projects.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ahmed. Any other questions from the audience? If not, I have one myself. Mathieu, for us, the early stage researchers that never had a project, a proposal approved or funded, which call is the best one for us to start?
Yeah, well, ideally, but that's of course depends a little bit on your situation and CV. That would be the ERC. Yeah. ERC starting grant, these kind of things, consolidator grant, but you don't necessarily have to reach that level. My suggestion would be is that within your whole part of labs, in which most of your supervisors are already active at the European level, try to become prominent there. What I do with my own collaborators is my team, and is I try to give them gradually prominent positions, like they become work package leader, task leader, and so on. And by doing so, they will get to know, the hang of it, and it's a snowball effect. Then people will pick that up, and they will be asked not meet the supervisor, but actually the young investigator to maybe in a follow-up project to play a very important role. So that's something you can do without necessarily looking yourself for a project proposal or project call to act as coordinator. You can do it, of course, but it's not always that easy, especially if you did not have that experience before. My suggestion would be is try to first increase your capabilities and your visibility in existing networks in which you're already involved. But there is a huge responsibility for this with the supervisor. I know that is not always very evident. It really depends on the policy of the group where you're acting in. For me, I take this as a priority, is to help to shape also the careers of my young investigators in the team. Talk about this with your supervisor. I mean, they should give you a chance, of course, to build your career, of course.
Yeah, that sounds great. And this is also aligned with a question that we have on the chat from Marsha. I'll read it. Being a project leader sounds nice, but what if you like to be a partner? how can we increase the chance to be asked? And I guess this is much aligned with what you just said, like networking and improving your visibility, right?
Yeah, it's networking, visibility, and so on. But usually, well, it's not really appreciated if you're approached by somebody who tells you, I like to be involved, but I like to be a partner and not more than that. That's usually saying, yeah, that's not nice. I mean, you can think this, but try to put this in a different way, because it comes across not very nicely and not very proactively. But in general, I would say yeah, again, make yourself visible, prominent, and you will be picked up. You will see it's a very spontaneous, it's a natural process.
Yeah, thanks very much. And well, any other question from the audience? We still have 2 minutes. Carolina, yeah.
Hi,
ahead,
I have sorry. Yeah, I was wondering, first of all, very nice presentation, very inspiring. Thank you. And I was wondering, also related with how to pick a partner and how to make the selection. We are all working in a similar field, and maybe you might have some connections to people who you trust. And at the same time, you might have read some publications from people who seem to be capable. And then if these people work in a similar field, you have to pick one person or maybe one team. How to make these decisions?
So okay, I did not fully grasp the question. So can you redefine?
I mean the subjectivity in the choice. So practical. Maybe you cannot hear me, right? Or
but every now and then, but probably it's my side because the network is not really optimal. But that's my computer, my issue here.
So I'll repeat. Sorry. What I mean is the subjectivity in the choice of people who you work with. So as a project coordinator, you have to pick, right? And then some people you might have experience with, and with others you might have read some publications from. And then how do you pick if they have similar works?
Yeah. Well, that's a good one. So that's why it's so important to, build up your own network. It might be that you know somebody in your own network that does exactly as somebody you do not know, but you know the publications which are published in very good journals, which might be not the case for that same person in your network. Then my suggestion would be to still go for the one that would be most reliable in your experience. That's what I say about I prefer proactivity over excellence. So if you have two teams or two partners that would do exactly the same, and you will have to make a choice, is you should not necessarily pick the one that on paper has the best CV. It should be the one that is most proactive and that you can rely upon. But that's something that you as a coordinator has to decide. So there is an element of subjectivity here. That is, it's just the experience that will help you to make the good decision here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I guess we are on time to end the webinar. And well, if there is any other question, please feel free to send it to us, to the ASPIS in our LinkedIn group or to our email that is on our website. We shared the links on the chat here, and we can forward to Mathieu. Well, thank you very much all for attending our first webinar. Thank you, Mathieu, for sharing all this expertise with us. So very much appreciated. And well, wish you all a great weekend and see you on our next webinar. Stay tuned in our website and our LinkedIn group to know when it will be the next one.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you.